welcome to HBSDealer.com's one-on-one video series. Thank you for watching. I'm Ken Clark, editor of HBS Dealer. From 1983 to 1996, this man, Jim Inglis, played a major role at the Home Depot, including the role of Executive Vice President of Merchandising. He's currently president of Inglis Consulting, traveling the world and serving his clients. And he's also the author of the book, Breakthrough Retailing: How a Bleeding Orange Culture Can Change Everything. Jim, welcome to the show. A good place to start is your book. Can you tell us about the origin?
Well, the book is really two books in one. The first half of the book, and it's a big book, it's 400 pages. So the first half of the book is the history of Home Depot. And the origin of that is living it, having been there almost at the beginning. Starting in 1983, we had 8 stores. And after that, we began to grow across the country, as you know. And so having lived it, it was very easy to write the book because it was just a matter of sitting down and recalling the history of the company and then observing what's happened since I left the company. And then after I left Home Depot, I began working with home centers all around the world. And I would bring their management teams to Atlanta to observe Home Depot, but also to identify what are the principles that will grow your business. And so over a period of those meetings, I developed a set of principles that we can learn by observing how Home Depot grew their business, and in fact, how all the other home centers in the world are applying similar principles in their markets.
Back in the early days of the growth of Home Depot, it was a really exciting time, and that part of the book I thought was particularly exciting. Can you? There was a chapter called "How the Competition Tried to Compete." I thought that was really interesting. What did you see? What were the patterns? And not only were they not doing the right thing, it seemed that in your book you explained that they were doing the exact opposite thing that they should have been doing.
That's correct. Well, you know, when Home Depot started, and first full year was 1980, there were over 32 regional home centers across the United States. And, you know, depending on what part of the country you were in, if you were in Florida, South Florida, it was Lindsley Lumber. If you were in Washington, D.C., it was Hechinger's. If you were in the Northeast, it might be Channel Lumber. Or if you were on the West Coast, it was Builders Emporium. And they were all very, very similar stores. They were basically 30,000 square feet. They bought from two-step distribution. They operated on about 38% margin, and all pretty much copied each other. In fact, at that time, as I recall, the mecca was to go to Washington, D.C. and visit Hechinger's because they were supposedly the people with all the answers. Well, we rolled into Washington, D.C., and the industry thought it was a wonderful store. The customers weren't that excited about it because they didn't get the service that they thought they should have. So when we went into the market, we went in with the proposition that we wanted to give them customers no reason to go elsewhere to shop. And what would happen typically, as you said, we kind of outlined in the book that the first thing they would do is immediately start to remodel their stores. And of course, this meant their stores were torn to pieces. So here we were coming in with a new proposition for the customers. And they were going to their existing stores and finding the stores torn up. And then what were they trying to do as they remodeled the stores? Well, they were trying to make them pretty. They were trying to make them attractive because they saw this new competition coming. But what they didn't realize is that because we wanted to give the customer an impression of value. So they were making their stores more retail, while we were coming in with a completely different model that was really wholesale focused. And so then the next step they would do would be to try to meet our prices. But what they would do is lower their prices to try to compete, but their stores were small. They didn't have the inventory, so they didn't get more sales. They just got less margin. And so the next step would be to say, you know what? We've been here, we've got more stores in the market. Our customers will be loyal even if we charge a little higher price. Well, as soon as they made that statement and took that strategy, we knew that we had won the war. And eventually, as you know, they all of those 32 stores were in fact put out of business.
The rest is history, and you could read about that in all the old issues of National Home Center News,
Right.
the forerunner of HBS Dealer. By the way, were you an avid reader of National Home Center News?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was the Bible.
That's great to hear that. Now, audience, hang with us here. We're going to get a little complicated. There's a term, gross margin return on inventory investment, GMROI. Very important in the early days. Jim, can you kind of explain in a concise and memorable way why that was such an important metric for you?
Sure. You know, understanding GMROI and its significance is really the secret to being able to go into the market and have the kind of pricing and value that that allows you to capture the great market share. And basically, so many retailers in the past and today base their pricing on trying to manage their gross margin percentage, trying to either protect that margin and, if possible, growing that margin. Well, the problem with that is if you increase your gross margin percentage every month and every quarter going forward, you'll eventually destroy your business because you'll simply have higher and higher prices. With GMROI, it's an index, and it says what are not the gross margin percentage, but what's the gross profit dollars during an accounting period, and you divide it by the average inventory at cost. That gives you an index of productivity, and it's based on how many gross profit dollars you took to the bank. It's far more important how many gross profit dollars you took to the bank than what your gross margin percentage was on paper. And that's what a lot of retailers do not understand today. And it's certainly what the retailers that we competed with at the start of Home Depot did not understand. That was the knowledge that we had that allowed us to have a better value for our customer.
Another important consideration in Home Depot in the early days, perhaps also today, is the definition of merchant. You have strong opinions about that. You explain them in the book. I think our audience would be interested to know why that's such an important thing to have the right idea of what a merchant does for a company.
Well, you know, most companies, certainly most large home improvement stores, will have a staff that they call the buyers. And it's not just home improvement stores. It could be a department store. It could be a different type of retailer, but they have buyers. And the buyer's main job, it seems, is to try to figure out how to increase the bottom line by increasing the gross margin. And the way you do that is you negotiate with the vendor, and you try to get a better cost. So your focus is on the vendor. At Home Depot, we didn't call our buyers buyers. We called our buyers merchants, because a merchant, rather than focused on how do we increase our gross margin percentage by negotiating with the vendors, the merchant is looking at how do we delight our customer, and as such increase our sales. And so when you're focused on the vendor, you're trying to lower your cost. When you're focused on the customer, you're trying to find new ways to delight that customer and increase sales. Now, you have to have two hats. You have to have a hat that's a buyer, and you have to have a hat that's a merchant. But the issue is, how much time do you wear your buyer hat, and how much time do you wear your merchant hat? And I think that in most companies, the buyers or the merchants, they're wearing their buyer hat almost all the time, and they're not wearing the merchant hat very often. And I think if you want to be a successful growing retailer, you need to have that buyer hat, but most of the time you need to have the merchant hat on. Most of the time you need to be spending your time thinking about how do we delight our customer, how do we create more sales, and how do we find new and exciting ways to delight the customer. So it's not that one's good and one's bad. It's just how much time do you spend in each activity.
A phrase I think you used in your book is that the merchant is a lawyer for the customer, representing them.
Absolutely. That's got to be your attitude from day one, is, what can we do to delight the customer? What can we do to reinforce to the customer that, they came in today and they had a great experience, and now we reinforce the idea that the next time they need home improvement products, they're going to come back to our store.
Jim, do the lessons from the early days of Home Depot apply to modern retailing?
Yeah, I think the principles, I believe, are universal. I think there's different tactics. You might have some different tactics today because, well, at the start of Home Depot, there was no internet. So maybe the tactics are somewhat different, but those principles are the same. I outlined 10 principles in my book. I think they were just as true in 1980 as they are in 2022. While the tactics might change, but you'll always go back to, our first job is to delight the customer, and what are the principles that will help us do that?
I was looking back in some old issues and just stumbled accidentally upon a 1999 book review of Built from Scratch, the Arthur Blank, Bernie Marcus biography of the history of Home Depot. And our reviewer wrote the following criticism of that book. They wrote that, for instance, there isn't one word in this book about Jim Inglis, who was essentially the company's number 3 executive for 13 years and one of the architects of international expansion. There you have it. Why weren't you in the...
Well, the truth of the matter is there were 2 built from scratch books. There was one book written that had quite a few articles about Jim Inglis in it, and there was another built from scratch book that did not. And there was great debate in the company at that time as to which of those books would actually be printed. And at that time, I was working with the Sodimac people in South America, and Home Depot was entering the South America market. And as a result, at that particular moment, I was persona non grata. And so the book was actually written by a ghostwriter, and he did his research. And when he did his research, he wrote a book that did include Jim Inglis. But then there was a second run at the book to clean the book up and get Jim Inglis out of it. And so there were 2 versions. And it really came down to the day of publication, as I understand it from internal people at Depot. It was an internal meeting to say, we've got to come to a decision, lock the door, shut the door. We've got to decide, is Jim Inglis in the book or out of the book? And at the last minute, it was decided Jim Inglis would be out of the book. So that's the story of the 2 different built from scratch books.
Well, Jim Inglis is certainly included in Breakthrough Retailing, How a Bleeding Orange Culture Can Change Everything. Thanks very much for talking to us, Jim.
Thanks, Ken. It was a lot of fun.